Welcome to Conversations About Change. My name is Susan Schifrin. I'm the founder and director of Arts Philadelphia, and I am delighted to welcome you to this second in our new series of conversations about how we and our partners working together can improve the quality of life for people affected by dementia. This is our 10th year at Arts Philadelphia, and that gives us an opportunity, almost a requirement, to celebrate the fact that we've gotten this far because everything we do is collaborative, everything we do is based on partnership. And so we want to take this opportunity to introduce you to some of our long-lived partners, to introduce you to what they do, and how we've crossed each other's paths and what we're doing together. So that all having been said, it is my great pleasure to welcome today Kevin Jameson, who is, let's see if I can get all of the titles correct, the founder, the president, the CEO, and board chair for Dementia Society of America. We're having our conversation today as a way of marking Brain Injury Awareness Month. Kevin has some very personal connections with that observation. And so, Kevin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
I would like to start by asking you to talk a little bit about your personal and professional connections with dementia, which we share, but also with brain injury awareness.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Susan. It's great to be here. You do fantastic work, so I always love to do things with you, and this is one of them. But, you know, I mean, for me, I really never had a connection to dementia directly. You know, I mean, we all have, or we hope we all have, grandparents at some point in their lives that may develop some cognitive impairments, but dementia in the sense that we're talking about today, no. Up until, you know, much later in my life. So the bulk of my life was, you know, entrepreneurial. It was, you know, working for ultimately some large companies as well. And so, you know, as I went through my life, you know, I really didn't have to think about dementia. I didn't think about brain health. I didn't think about anything except, you know, what was front and center, which was my career and my family and so forth, and friends and traveling the world and doing things that, you know, were of interest to me. But then at one point, my wife and I were having some marital difficulties, and I didn't really know, you know, what was going on. I was prepared to get a divorce or at least be separated. And in that process, I asked Ginny, my wife, if she would go to a marriage counselor, which we did. She said yes, which was great. And maybe 6 months to a year in, it's hard to know how long that was, but you know, the marriage counselor pulled me aside separately one day and said, you know, Kevin, I think you love Ginny. Ginny loves you. You've been together 20 years. You know, you've raised some kids. But there's something else going on with Ginny that I really don't know what it is, and I think it needs to be investigated. And I kind of said like, oh, okay, you know, is it a psychiatric issue? You know, what is it? I don't know. She didn't know. So one thing led to another, and we went out to dinner one night at a place we'd been to before, and we sat down, and I called the hostess by name, you know, thanking her for seating us. And Ginny said to me, "How do you know her?" And I said, "Oh, because, you know, last time we were here, she had an interesting different name." And I remembered it. She goes, "Well, I've never been here. What are you talking about?" I said, "Of course we've been here. We were here last month, actually." She said, "No, I've never been here in my life. You must have been here with another woman." And that right there was a watershed moment for me, because I then understood that, you know, her challenges might have been related to something going on cognitively that I just hadn't been aware of. Well, as it turned out, and I only really looked at this years later, was that she had had a traumatic brain injury, a concussion in a car accident when she was working. She was driving somebody else's car, and it was a low-slung sports car, and she got, you know, T-boned And I remember I was in Washington, D.C. I came back. I was called back from the emergency room to come, respond to that. But I wouldn't really put the pieces together. And there were a number of other things that happened in her life. She had back surgery that was 6 hours under anesthesia. She had hormone replacement therapy. We lost a friend on 9/11. I mean, there were a whole bunch of issues. But Susan, at the end of the day, I can't point to one thing, but I will say this, that head injury in general is not a good thing. Whether it's chronic concussions like football players get, or whether it's a fall or an accident, or even, some type of other type of trauma, family trauma sometimes leads to physical altercations. Any type of abuse, these things can cause head traumas, and they don't have very good outcomes for most people long term. And so, all things being said, eventually dementia became really part of our lives because Ginny was diagnosed with some form of dementia, really an unknown. And back when she was diagnosed, they really couldn't put their finger on one thing. So they kind of, chalked it up, but they really didn't know, what was the actual cause. And, so through that trajectory of care, I started the Dementia Society in the last year of your life. And then we met. And, so that began our connection too.
And that, first of all, Kevin, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think the trajectory of things not being quite right to a diagnosis that no one wants to hear is probably something that will ring true with a lot of people listening and watching. And the fact that you started Dementia Society as an outgrowth of your experience with Ginny is certainly something good that came out of her experiences. And I know that Ginny is remembered in all aspects of what Dementia Society does. But you just gave me a wonderful segue. Yes, you started Dementia Society and we met. So my next question is, why the connection between our two organizations from your perspective?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's pretty straightforward. You look like a mover and shaker, somebody that was getting things done. And I felt like I needed to get things done. So who better to learn from than somebody that's already doing it? So, and you were involved in an area that I felt was very important, which are the arts in general, let's put it broadly. Mm-hmm. But whether it be, the graphic arts, or whether it be like visual arts, or whether it be the musical arts, or whether it be dance or movement, other types of non-medical therapies, these are things that I know reach people very deeply and directly, regardless of where they are in the kind of their continuum of their dementia journey. And it also is helpful to caregivers and carers and care partners. So anybody that's involved in the circle of care, so to speak, I think can benefit from these non-medical approaches that oftentimes, work wonders and regardless of what the pharmaceutical solutions might be.
Right. So tell us a little bit about Dementia Society's mission and how it is that you came to have this conviction that there is a place, a very prominent place, for non-pharmacological, non-medicalizing interventions for people living with dementia.
Well, so the mission of the Dementia Society is very straightforward, actually. It's raising awareness and educating people. That's number one. Number two are kind of focusing on non-medical therapies, as you said, So funding as well as promoting the use of non-medical therapies. And then the third component is kind of a recognition component. And we kind of lump together things like recognizing carers, recognizing innovators, recognizing other nonprofits, recognizing research work that's being done. And we do that in a variety of ways. But, so for me, it was just a matter of what's the number one thing that we want to accomplish? And that is get people accurate, timely information, and then back it up with resources, back it up with referrals where needed. Give them all the tools that we can give them, because we can't give them everything, because we're dealing with people across the United States and Canada, and so we can only do so much. But there are a lot of organizations, that are doing things, in the dementia community that we want to help and promote and make other people aware of them. So it certainly is why we're connected, I think. And it just, not a lot of people were doing that. There were folks that were raising awareness about Alzheimer's disease, which is one cause of many, or Lewy body dementia, or frontotemporal dementia, or stroke, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob, or CTE, what the football players can tend to get sometimes. Those things had their own organizations. But at the time I started, there was really, and even today, we're really the only national dementia organization doing what we do. There are other national organizations, but they're usually generally focused on younger onset dementias or some other aspect, but we're really, broad in our scope.
Absolutely. And I know that one of the things that you always start with is the image of the umbrella.
Yes.
And this is something that we encounter too as an organization. Unlike most organizations or institutions that pair the arts with dementia-related interventions, we work with people from pre-diagnosis to hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, you are there to provide information and support and resources to people who fall under that big umbrella in any shape or form. And, we know that there are, what is it up to now, 200 plus different manifestations of dementia-related conditions. Alzheimer's disease, such as it is, tends to be the most well-known, but there's a lot of confusion that is the big umbrella, and dementia is somehow a little thing under it. Not the case.
Right. And that's what we spend our time, really getting people to understand. And it takes effort because, the big messages that come out are from the government and from, large organizations, throughout the world. And it's typically kind of very narrow cast in its presentation. And so we are the exact opposite. We want to be broadly casting, and we also want to be catch and release. So we want people to be helped by whatever organization is going to best help them. If it's us, great. But more often than not, we can get them started, but then they need to go on and be helped by others.
Which is another kind of extraordinary thing about Dementia Society.
Yes, we have a big need, and we talk with lots of people every day, every week, every month, thousands and thousands of people. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that know zero to nothing about dementia. So even though we think, oh, everybody knows this or that, the reality is most people don't know anything about it. So, they know something about cancer because cancer, we're kind of where cancer was 50 years ago. And in terms of talking about it, stigma, taboo, understanding there's different types, that was all kind of an unknown to a lot of people up until recently. So yeah, that's what we do. And in the same way that cancer now has survivors, there may be the day where there are survivors, so to speak, of dementia, but there aren't today. But there are things happening in the space, and I think it's positive. So I think overall, bottom line is it's a community effort. If somebody really wants or needs something that you can provide that I can't provide, I'm not just talking about Susan, but I'm talking about just organizations in general. Why do I need to hold on to that person? Let them go. Push them there.
Model of community mindedness. We need more of you. So I know that from having spoken over the years, I know that one of the reasons that you founded the organization was because of your and Ginny's own experiences in a climate where an organization like yours didn't exist.
Right.
And I wonder if you could share with us a little bit your sense of the things that still need to change in how we as a society or a world at this point understand dementia, perceive people living with dementia, anything that you feel requires pressing change.
Well, I think it's really a matter of, removing the fear that's involved, both the personal fear about yourself developing something and the fear of somebody else developing something, and the fear of interfacing with somebody that has maybe some cognitive challenge. So, and part of that is, that I'll give you a great example. It's not uncommon for us to have families and family members come to us and say, my mother is yelling and screaming at me and calling me a liar, that I took her jewelry, or that, or a husband calls and says, my wife thinks I have a girlfriend. And I'm yelling and screaming at her, and she's yelling and screaming at me. And, one of the explanations that we can often say is, well, if somebody is in a wheelchair, you wouldn't scream at them and tell them to get up. And like, what are you doing sitting there? Get up. If the person can't get up, they can't get up. There's a reason why they're in a wheelchair. And so, the biggest issue is getting people to grapple with the fact that these brain changes are part of life. And we all, if we live long enough, will have some significant brain changes. But, most people die before those brain changes occur, from heart disease, from cancer, from accidents, from any number of things. But, but age is a big risk factor for dementia. So at the end of the day, it is a natural part of our state of being. And therefore, in the same way that we might look at death, how do we look at death? Some people run from it. Some people run toward it. Other people just think about it, with rational intelligence, that death is part of life. And there would be no life if there weren't death. And I always ask the question, is not a matter of, is there life after death? The question is there life before death? So the same is true with dementia, and if I or somebody I love develops it, figure out ways to guide them and keep them as safe as possible and give them opportunities to still live a fruitful and fulfilling life. It may not always be possible, but more likely than not, it's more possible than it isn't possible.
Well said. How do we define a well-lived or meaningful life after a dementia diagnosis?
Well, I don't think it's much different than before the dementia diagnosis, because at the end of the day, it's about connective tissue, right? It's about, what are the interpersonal relationships that we have? How are we involved in community? What are our sensory inputs? What are our opportunities for self-expression? That definitely falls in line with things like non-medical therapies, making art, observing art, making music, listening to music, holding somebody's hand, swaying to music, tapping your toe. These are all forms of self-expression and connection. So, I firmly believe, because you can see it in any nursing home you go into, just walk in and smile at somebody and say, "How you doing? You look beautiful today." And they will radiate, regardless of the condition, almost always. So my thinking is, and it's no different when you're playing music or when you introduce artwork to somebody, or finger painting or whatever it is, collaging, they're able, to have self-expression, and life is really about, expressing oneself and being accepted in that expression.
Absolutely. And being a valued part of a community, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that's the acceptance part, right?
That's right. Absolutely. So I'm wondering, you've talked about one of the priorities at Dementia Society being the support of other organizations, individual artists, social workers, who deliver non-pharmacological interventions. And I think it's fair to say that's another way in which Dementia Society is fairly unique. As an advocacy, awareness, information sharing organization in the so-called dementia space, it is unusual for an organization to espouse forms of intervention that are seen as non-traditional, and to put their money in support of such interventions.
Sure.
Do you have a story that you can share with us about something that Dementia Society has supported in that non-traditional, non-pharmacological sphere that reinforced your conviction? This is what we need to support.
I think there's 1,000 stories. It's not one story. Quite frankly, it would be a disservice to say that there was one story, because, it's every time we do something like that, it's beneficial to everybody, and that's the beauty of it. It's like, yeah, we supported some organizations financially, some organizations just, in spirit, right? Because we don't have unlimited funds, and we need to always be cognizant of that. We want to spend our donors' investment in what we do wisely. So, it's not like we have a blank check for anything, far from it. But, selected ideas, selected community events, selected organizations, when we see that an investment is going to help a multitude of people, because we don't like to do things that just help one person. I mean, that's good, but it's not as good as, helping many people with an investment. And it's only one part of what we do, and it's not the largest part of what we do. So, our number one, back to that, is awareness and education and resources, tools, so forth. So that takes up, 80% of what we do. And then there's that 10 to 15% that we invest into the non-medical, and then all the other things we do. So, for me, toe tapping, smiles, laughter, raised eyebrows in solitude and heightened awareness. These are the, kind of the micro expressions resulting from, the things that are done.
That's
And, Yeah, it's more than tossing a ball back and forth. That's a kindergarten game. Yes, there's some, physical aspect to it, and yes, there's community and blah, blah, blah. But, creation, creating something, listening to something that's being created for you in your presence, very powerful.
Absolutely. And you're talking about things like a raised eyebrow, a smile spreading across a face that previously was,
Non-responsive.
so-called non-responsive.
Yes. No, I mean, at least on the surface, right?
Right. Puts me in mind of an earlier conversation about change that I had with one of the care partners we work with, Madeline Groves, who was talking as a professional caregiver, as a family care partner for her mom, was talking about how essential it is to recognize those tiny cues, especially for people who do not have access to verbal expression.
Right.
There are so many other ways that they tell us who they are and what they mean.
Absolutely.
So that's actually a really wonderful sort of intersection between your two approaches. So, Kevin, you talked about the need to educate, to limit as much as possible the impact of stigma, to create the possibility of connection as some of the changes that we're still working on making. How do you feel that the work we do together, Dementia Society and Arts Philadelphia, furthers those changes?
Well, it absolutely. First of all, it does for a variety of reasons, right? First of all, you and I working together on a personal level, just reinforces community.
Mm-hmm.
We are based in the Philadelphia area. So
Mm-hmm.
Arts Philadelphia, and we're Philadelphia based. Come on. If I hadn't reached out to you, I think it would be unusual. So, I mean, I think that knowing that you're doing the work you're doing, you're an extension of us, right? Because we just can't do it all, and neither can you.
Right.
You can do what you can do. You've got funds, you've got people, you've got programs, but it's not an infinite resource, and it's no different with us. But by us, partnering, whether it's funding for the programs or whether it's moral support for the programs, that all just goes to extending our reach without us having to build an infrastructure to do what you're already doing.
Right.
Like, why do we need to do that?
Right. Right.
When people are doing it already, I don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm. And your point, Kevin, about the importance of building community within the field of service providers is such an important one. A lot of what we do at Arts is community driven, it's neighborhood driven, it's we try to be as responsive as possible to our stakeholders, our constituents. But you're so right that, as I said at the beginning, Arts Philadelphia doesn't have a physical space. We don't have, the kind of infrastructure that would enable us to be creating the impact we create in the absence of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just pointed out a similar situation on your half. I think the lesson here is the more we come together as service providers, the better it is for everyone. Shared research, shared resources, just learning by virtue of collaborating. And I think that's actually one of the changes that hasn't happened enough. And so I hadn't quite thought of it this way, but I think that's another change-making model that it would be wonderful to see replicated. And certainly there are great islands of, or oases of healthcare institutions collaborating with service providers, collaborating with, artists, but not enough.
Right. Well, a lot of it just comes down to the almighty dollar.
It does. It does.
And, preservation of one's job or one's income and the income of others. So, when you can let that go, and that's not easy, and not everybody can do it, but when you can let go of that, and that's not what's driving the reason why you're doing something, then collaboration becomes much easier because the collaboration isn't costing you, and it's not costing the other person. It's a win-win. It's benefit.
If you were to give, and I know you're very humble and you've made it clear that you understand that there are different approaches and they coexist. If you were to offer a word of advice to other organizations that are genuinely hoping to make a difference in the lives of people with dementia and their families and their communities, what would that word of advice be?
Oh, well, again, it wouldn't be one word. But,
what would those words be?
I mean, part of the idea is to always, to the extent that you can say yes, say yes. And saying no is important too, right? And you learn how to say no, when to say no, and you say more. You probably say no more often as you age. You're like, nah, I've done that. No, don't want to do that. No, been there, done that. But but saying yes and being open to experiment, being open to trial and error at whatever age the organization is and at whatever age you are or your teams are. I think being open to that and saying, let's give it a try. Now, it's not going to be 100%. You are going to fail, and failure's okay. It points to other things that you can do differently, and you may find, a gem in there somewhere. So I would just simply say, say yes more than you say no to certain things. But you always need the boundaries. So, respect that. But I think just having that, glass half full, glass half empty. Some people say, what glass? And, okay. But, but if you look like, listen, there's more where that came from, then, you're going to enter relationships and discussions differently.
I think this is what fundraising specialists call the abundance perspective, as opposed to thinking in terms of the dearth of things. Think in terms of the possible.
Exactly. And whether it's fundraising, whether it's programs that you want to do, you can't do everything, but you can always do things better. And so continuous improvement is a big part of that, and be willing to take risks, be willing to take advice from others, make changes along the way, know when it's time to stop. These are all things that actually come with age and wisdom. And that's what all of us have, despite whether we're cognitively intact or not. And cognitively intact is kind of a crazy comment to think about, right? we all have brains. We are all at risk for everything. And we all have different levels of cognitive capability. So, let's just open up and see what takes us where it takes us.
What a wonderful way to end this conversation. Change is only possible when you're open to it and when taking risks is part of your vocabulary. So, Kevin, thank you for 10 years of working together. Thank you for all that Dementia Society does. You are located in the Philadelphia area, but obviously your reach is now international.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So thank you for all that you do. And thank you for taking your personal experiences with Ginny and turning them into a resource that helps so many Kevins and Ginnies.
Well, you're quite welcome. And it's an honor to be able to take the love that we had and share it with others.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Kevin.